My son came back from work. What he did to me was unbelievable. Those words haunt me, looping in my mind like a cruel refrain. My name is Emily Davis, and at 60, I believed I'd weathered life's fiercest storms. A widow for a decade, raising Derek alone after his father's passing, I thought nothing could shake me anymore. But that night, when my only son walked through the door, I realized how wrong I was. It was an ordinary evening, or so I thought. The kitchen smelled of beef stew, Derek's favorite, simmering on the stove. I hummed softly, stirring the pot, comforted by the routine. Derek had been working late often, his new job at the law firm demanding long hours. I worried about him, but I was just glad he was home safe when I heard the front door creak open. "Derek, is that you?" I called, wiping my hands on my apron. No answer. Odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was tired. Then he appeared in the kitchen doorway, and my heart stuttered. His eyes weren't right. They were dark, intense, like a storm brewing behind them. Nothing like the warm hazel gaze I'd known since he was a boy. His suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, but it wasn't his appearance that unnerved me. It was the way he looked at me, predatory, almost. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. He stepped closer, and I instinctively backed up, my hip brushing the counter. I tried to laugh, to lighten the tension. "Honey, you okay? Rough day at work?" But he cut me off, his hand darting out to grab my wrist. His grip was firm, not painful, but it sent a jolt through me. "Derek, what—" "Don't," he said sharply, his eyes locking onto mine. "Just listen." My pulse raced, confusion and fear tangling in my chest. This wasn't my son. Not the boy who'd clung to me after nightmares. Not the man who'd brought me flowers on Mother's Day. This was someone else. What happened next is hard to describe, even now. His touch wasn't violent, but it was wrong. His fingers lingered too long on my arm, sliding up to my shoulder. His breath warm against my neck as he leaned in. He whispered things no son should ever say to his mother. Words that made my skin crawl and my heart pound with a sickening mix of shock and shame. I froze, my mind screaming to push him away, but my body wouldn't move. Part of me couldn't believe this was happening, couldn't reconcile this stranger with my Derek. Then came the threat, soft as a lover's secret, but sharp as a blade. "If you refuse me, you'll never see me again." His words sank into me, heavy and cold. Derek was all I had, my only family, my anchor in a world that had taken so much. The thought of losing him, of being truly alone, was unbearable. That fear, that desperate love, overpowered my will to resist. I don't know how long we stood there, his hands on me, his voice weaving a web I couldn't escape. When he finally stepped back, his eyes were unreadable. "Good night, Mom," he said, as if nothing had happened, and walked upstairs. I sank to the floor, trembling, the stew forgotten on the stove. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, wondering if I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. That was only the beginning. I told myself it was a one-time thing. Derek had been stressed, maybe even drunk, though I hadn't smelled alcohol. I clung to that excuse, desperate to believe my son wasn't capable of crossing such a line again. But the next night shattered that fragile hope. He came home early, the sun still lingering on the horizon. I was in the living room pretending to read, though my eyes hadn't focused on a single word. When I heard his key in the lock, my stomach twisted. I wanted to run, to lock myself in my room, but I stayed rooted to the couch, praying I was overreacting. "Mom," he said, stepping into the room. His voice was different tonight, smoother, almost coaxing. He'd changed out of his suit into jeans and a black shirt, looking more like the Derek I knew, but his eyes still held that unsettling intensity. He sat beside me, too close, his thigh brushing mine. I shifted away, clutching my book like a shield. "Derek, we need to talk about last night," I started. my voice trembling. But he didn't let me finish. His hand found my knee, his touch deliberate, and my words died in my throat. "No talking," he murmured, leaning in. His breath was hot against my cheek, and then his lips were on my skin, trailing down my jaw, my neck. My face burned with shame, my mind screaming that this was wrong, unnatural, but my body betrayed me, frozen in place. His hands were everywhere, exploring with a boldness that made my heart race not just with fear, but with something else, something I couldn't name. I should have pushed him away. I should have screamed, called for help, anything. But the more I hesitated, the more he took, his touch blurring the line between coercion and something I'm ashamed to admit felt different. My quiet gasps filled the silence, and I hated myself for them, unsure if they came from horror or a traitorous part of me that responded to his persistence. Then, as suddenly as it began, he pulled back, his eyes glinting with something like triumph. "You like this, don't you?" he said, his voice cold, mocking. I couldn't answer. My throat was tight, my mind a storm of guilt and confusion. Because the worst part, a small, shameful part of me did. Not because I wanted this, not because I loved him that way, but because, in those moments, I felt seen, needed, in a way I hadn't in years. And that realization made me sick. He stood, adjusting his shirt as if nothing had happened. "See you tomorrow, Mom," he said, and left me there, trembling on the couch. I didn't move for hours, the book forgotten in my lap. The guilt was a living thing, clawing at my insides. I'd let this happen again. I hadn't fought hard enough. What kind of mother was I? I told myself it had to stop. I couldn't let this continue. Couldn't let Derek pull me deeper into this nightmare. But even as I made that vow, a part of me feared what he'd do if I resisted. His threat from the first night echoed in my mind. "You'll never see me again." I hated how much power those words held over me. By the third night, I'd rehearsed my speech 100 times. I'd be firm, clear, unyielding. "This is wrong, Derek. We can't do this. It stops now." I practiced in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to summon the strength I'd lost somewhere along the way. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for the bond we'd once had, the one he was destroying. When he came home, I was in the kitchen, gripping a mug of tea to steady my hands. The clock ticked loudly, each second amplifying my dread. He walked in, his presence filling the room like a shadow. "Hey, Mom," he said, casual, as if we were a normal family. But his eyes told a different story. Hungry, expectant. "Derek, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I set the mug down, squaring my shoulders. "What's been happening? It's wrong. It has to stop." I forced myself to meet his gaze, praying he'd see reason, that my son was still in there somewhere. But his face darkened, and before I could continue, he was across the room, his hand on my arm, his grip tighter than before. "You don't get to say no, Mom," he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. "Not after last night. Not after you let me." His words cut deep, twisting the knife of my guilt. He leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. "You wanted it. Don't pretend you didn't." I tried to pull away, but his hold tightened, not painful but unyielding. "Derek, please," I said, my voice breaking. "This isn't you. We can fix this. Get help." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that chilled me. "Help? You think anyone would understand? You think they'd believe you didn't want this?" His words hit like a slap. I realized then this wasn't about desire, not really. It was about control. He wasn't the boy who'd needed me, the man who'd made me proud. He was someone who thrived on my fear, my hesitation, my love for him, and I'd given him too much power by not stopping him sooner. He pulled me closer, his hands roaming, and I felt myself slipping, the fight draining out of me. But something snapped inside, a spark of anger, of self-preservation. I pushed against his chest hard, surprising us both. "No," I said louder this time. "This ends now." For a moment he froze, his eyes narrowing. Then he stepped back, a smirk curling his lips. "You'll change your mind," he said, as if my resistance was a game. "You always do." He turned and left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I collapsed into a chair, my heart pounding. I'd stood up to him, but at what cost? His words lingered, a warning I couldn't ignore. I knew he wouldn't let this go. Not easily. I won't lie, part of me still loves him. He's my son, my flesh and blood, the child I raised through sleepless nights and endless sacrifices. But love shouldn't feel like chains. Shouldn't twist your soul until you don't recognize yourself. I couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't face another night of his shadow looming over me. The decision came in the early hours, as dawn crept through the curtains. I lay awake, replaying the past 3 nights, the way Derek had changed, the way I'd let myself bend under his will. I couldn't do it anymore. I had to leave not just for my sake, but to break the cycle we'd fallen into. I waited until he left for work, his car pulling out of the driveway at 7 a.m. sharp. My hands shook as I packed a single bag, clothes, toiletries, a photo of Derek as a boy, smiling at the beach. I couldn't leave that behind, no matter what he'd become. I wrote no note, left no trace of where I was going. I didn't know myself. I took a bus to a small town 2 hours away, a place I'd visited once with my late husband. It was quiet, unassuming, the kind of place where no one asked questions. I checked into a motel, paying cash, and locked the door behind me. For the first time in days, I breathed. But the relief was fleeting. As I sat on the stiff motel bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, I realized Derek wouldn't let me go so easily. He wasn't the kind of man who accepted loss. I'd seen it in his eyes, that possessive glint, the need to control. He'd come looking for me and he'd find me. He was smart, resourceful, a lawyer who knew how to track people down. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? That my son had crossed lines no one would believe? That I'd hesitated, let it happen, because I was afraid of losing him? They'd see a confused old woman, not a victim. And Derek, charming, polished Derek, would spin a story to make me look unstable. I had no proof, no bruises, just the weight of my shame. So I planned to keep moving. Another town, another motel, maybe a new name. I'd disappear, become a ghost he couldn't find. But even as I made those plans, a part of me ached for the boy he'd been, the son I'd loved. I wondered if I could have stopped this, if I'd been stronger, if I'd seen the signs. The motel phone rang, startling me. I stared at it, my heart racing. No one knew I was here. It rang again, insistent, and I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Hello," I whispered. Silence. Then a soft chuckle, chillingly familiar. "Mom," Derek's voice said, smooth and calm. "You didn't think you could hide, did you?" The line went dead, and I knew he was already coming for me.